Monkey.
Right, so here we are, and we're back for the third and final part of our mini-series, and I've saved the best till last. So I'm covering the story of a man called John Clarence Hudson, who lived for 25 years in absolute poverty in a decrepit old little room on Railway Terrace in Salford. Now, John wouldn't part with a penny. He was eccentric and reclusive, and he was very rarely seen in public. And on the odd occasion that John was seen, he was normally grumbling to himself, moaning about the prices of food and coal to heat his house, and he was always moaning about eking his way through life, living off just £7 a week. So I think we all know someone like John, and when times are hard it's really understandable. But John didn't have to live the way that he did, because deep down, secretly, John was a multi-millionaire. So sit back, get your popcorn out and get ready, because this is the story of John Clarence Hudson, the Scrooge of Salford.
The story of John Clarence Hudson is one that has gone unnoticed since 1910. The story takes us back to a tiny row of houses called Railway Terrace in Salford. The row of houses backed onto the old train line where Regent Road roundabout now stands. But back in 1910, it once housed a man who was rarely seen. A man who lived in nothing more than a single room, confined, isolated, and alone. A frugal man by all accounts, who wouldn't part with a penny. He'd snarl and grimace at the thought of paying over the odds for any one given item, and in his dilapidated room in which he lived, with his filthy bed sheets that hadn't been changed in years, and rubbish piled high to the ceiling, John would count every shilling as if it was his last. Nudging his chair towards the coal fire that was sparsely lit and just enough to stay relatively warm. The windows were covered in thick black soot that came from the passing steam trains that ran along the train line directly behind his house, leaving Mr. Hudson almost in complete darkness in his own room. If it wasn't for a few candles spaced about and dimly illuminated just enough for him to see. There was old papers piled high everywhere, books galore, thick with dust that hadn't been opened in years, wine bottles under the bed, and old paintings hanging slanted on the walls. In the corner was a big old grand Victorian mirror propped up against the wall, with a tattered old bedsheet over the front of it, hiding the reflection of the person looking into it. He clearly didn't like to see who he'd become. John was a recluse and living in unimaginable squalid conditions, scrimping and scraping just to get by, day by day. Given that he owned the property on Railway Terrace, he allowed a young family to stay with him in the house. The conditions being that they never stepped foot into his room, and that his food would be provided for him in exchange for lodging at the house. They never saw him, as he lived on the top floor of the property and never left the space he was in. The only form of communication would be that he'd simply slide a note under the bedroom door and onto the landing, with instructions of what he would like for his dinner and tea, which would be collected by the couple. They would then prepare his meal and put the food outside of his door and go back downstairs. And when the coast was clear John would unlock his door and retrieve his meals without sight or sound of detection. A man of peculiar habits. It is said that he'd leave his room on the odd occasion only to get fresh air, and this would usually be in the dead of night. He'd walk around under the midnight sky, and if a passerby would see him, he would simply disappear and slip away down the back cobbled streets of the nearby houses, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and the coins as they jingled in his pockets, mumbling to himself as he stomped the streets, heading back to his bedroom. There was a thick old cane next to John's bed as rats had started to enter the house, scurrying across the bed sheets and pitter-pattering across the wooden floorboards. He'd used the cane to whack the rats away from his food. And on top of all this, John's health began to decline. And given the way he was living, it prompted concern for his well-being by the couple that lived below. And they finally decided to get John help. Confused and scared, John was reluctant to go, but he didn't have much of a choice. He was taken into a private nursing home where he was going to be looked after. And here's the original article that was printed about John back in 1910. The old man stated that he had not been bathed for over 20 years, but on Saturday, 2 nurses were engaged on this task for about 2.5 hours. On Sunday, they were engaged for a similar length of time, and the new bed and clothing having been supplied, Hudson now presents a much more comfortable appearance. After weeks in care, John started to open up to the staff, swapping and telling stories about the past and engaging with other people. He felt back to his normal self and admitted that he felt foolish, having lived in such conditions for so long. And the more that he opened up about his reclusive life, a bombshell was about to detonate on the eardrums of the staff as he revealed he was secretly a multi-millionaire. He explained that as a young man, he was one of the top solicitors in Manchester and made a considerable amount of income doing so, to which he still received an income of £600 a year. He also stated that he possessed £3,500 worth of London and North Western Railway stock, as well as owning numerous amounts of property on Portland Street in Manchester and also Salford. He lastly revealed that when his parents died, he inherited a lump sum of £30,000. And as the staff delved into the story more, they found that the old man was telling the truth. And given he was a stockholder to Manchester and Salford's corporation, he also owned bank shares. Back at his bedroom on Railway Terrace, hanging off one of the walls, was an original Morelli painting, to which he valued at £500. And upon emptying his room, found gold coins in abundance, as well as silver and gold bars of great value. He also had a fascination with butterflies, and he would examine them as they died on the windowsill during the spring and summer seasons, to which it inspired him to create a hobby. He wrote a book in great detail about how incredible the life of a butterfly was, the beauty, the colours, and and how each part of the body had a purpose. He was fascinated by the life that they led, almost looking lifeless, to cocooning into something remarkably beautiful. Each page filled with notes and handwritten in impeccable calligraphy. John was no fool. He was a highly intelligent man, but somehow he'd lost his way, later explaining that it was due to him having his heart broken as a young man, which led him to turn his back on the world and cutting himself off from society. Heartbreakingly, in the corner of John's room, in the midst of the filth, was a dining table set for two, with the finest cutlery and porcelain plates you could imagine. The table dressed immaculately, for two people to share an evening, and he always kept it in great condition, just in case that one day he happened to have had company. It's a story that you couldn't make up, and I suppose that the saying is true in the case of John Clarence Hudson, that sometimes you really do find a diamond in the rough.
So here I am, and I'm in the absolute labyrinth of Wee Cemetery, which I've been to many times before. I've been here to film Henry Burgess's grave, but the cemetery, this side of the cemetery, is very, very old. Now, I'm actually looking for John's actual grave. I have no idea what to expect, because given the mass amount of wealth that he had, am I looking for a grave that is grand and beautiful and, you know, a statement to his actual wealth and his life? Or am I looking for something that is basically really modest, you know? Maybe sort of like a pauper's grave. Maybe he didn't even spend a penny on his own funeral. I really don't know. But I've got the plot number and the grave area, so basically we're going to unearth it together and we're going to find it. But literally, if you just look behind me, it's a needle in a haystack kind of job. But going through John's life, you know, living the way that he did, he clearly had some sort of mental illness, I'd say. I'm not no doctor or psychiatrist, but normally people like him, you know, there is a backstory, and with John there definitely is. Another one like Hannah Furness, who is sort of became this recluse because of heartbreak again, and it seems to be like a common bit of a trait, really. Heartbreak and trauma seems to be the reason why many of these people turn their back on society. But deep down, John was a lovely fella. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret that I read about John. Now, as he sort of knew he was dying, basically in his will, he said that he had a phobia of premature burial. Not premature what you were thinking then, but premature burial. Now, he had a phobia of basically being buried while he's still alive. And apparently, I mean, I don't know, he seems to think it was a common theme back then, that people were wrongly being, you know, written off as dead when they weren't, and they were being buried alive. I really don't know what was going through his head at the time, but I have read stories about it happening. And he said he wanted to be buried a week after he died. So basically, make sure I'm proper dead before you bury me. And they said that they would, and they never did, sadly. And sadly, they just buried him. I think it was 4 days later. So they didn't sort of, you know, they didn't keep to their end of it, which is sad. Probably would have disgruntled him knowing that. But yeah, he had a phobia of basically being buried alive. Right, so that's enough of me rambling on now. Let's head over there now and try to find John's actual resting place. So what I'm after, grave number 167, that's 170, so this must be 169, 168 must be here. Yeah, 168, 167. 167. Should be there. Should be here. What's going on here? 167. 170. 169. 168. 167. Oh, what a shame. His actual headstone's gone. So his grave would have been here. Because it's not these two. These are total different graves. So his grave is actually gone. What an absolute shame. What's this stone here? What's that? What's that say? June the 2nd. This must have been part of his headstone then, maybe. What an absolute shame. So, it appears that John's grave is no longer. Now, I do know a lot of this side of the cemetery, a lot of the graves are actually, basically, you know, they've aged and snapped and cracked and they just lay on the floor. But sadly for John, all that remains is this. And I mean, you know, there's no other stones round here. What's that? What's that? What the hell's that? What? There's an actual key? How strange is that? What the hell? What does it say? Wow, that's really weird, isn't it? So all that remains is a key and part of a headstone that I'm presuming, because it's in the sort of mud here, it can only have been from here. But this is where John's headstone once were, and it's such a shame that we found the actual plot, because he's buried right here. But his headstone must have been, basically, it's broke, hasn't it? And they've removed it. But this is definitely the plot. This is plot 167. But this is strange. But did I expect, you know, anything less? I was thinking maybe there would be this monumental grave because he had so much money, but sadly this doesn't surprise me. You know, it's just sad to see that there isn't an actual grave here that can pay respects. But I suppose I can sort of basically say I'm glad that I found your resting place, John. And I'm sure you was a lovely, lovely fella, you know. And I'm glad that at the end of your life you found happiness again and you were being looked after, and that was the main thing. And I'm sure you was happy in your own way anyway when you was living in Railway Terrace, you know. But I'm so glad that I found your plot. I feel a bit silly talking to a key and a bit of stone, but this is all I can go off. But I know that you're here, and I just want to say, you know, what an interesting life that you led. And I want you to know that you're not forgotten in death, and may you rest in peace, John.
In the city of Salford, there lived an old man. John Hudson was his name, known throughout the land. On Railway Terrace he resided, frugal and alone, counting every shilling as if it was a precious stone. His pockets jingled with pennies, never wanting to spend. A recluse in his own home, his wealth he wouldn't lend. But little did they know, and the city folks were unaware, that John Hudson's secret was way beyond compare. For hidden in the attic, behind a cobwebbed door, lay treasures untold, a fortune to explore. Gold coins, silver bars, jewels that brightly gleamed. The riches of a lifetime shone like a sunbeam. John Hudson chuckled softly at his grand disguise. A Scrooge on the outside, but a king in disguise. So remember, dear reader, when wealth seems out of view, the lesson of John Hudson, sometimes what glitters is true.
Right, so that concludes our 3-part mini-series. The first one being on Henry Lamont Cooper, the man-child of Salford. The second one being Hannah Furness, the High Peak recluse. And the third one being John Clarence Hudson, the Scrooge of Salford. Now, I have to say, I've absolutely loved researching and reviving these stories. They've been basically hidden and buried away in the archives of the newspaper archives for absolutely decades. And it's just been a pleasure to bring these characters to you, and I really do hope, well I will, somewhere down the line in the near future, I want to do more on these. Now, they don't necessarily have to be a series on recluses and eccentrics, but just local characters of the past that had a bit about them, you know. There's a backstory, and I absolutely love it. So I will definitely be revisiting this kind of series to bring to you. So I'm going to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching the video. Thanks for all your interest. You seem to have enjoyed it, which is the key thing for me. Because if you enjoy it and I enjoy it, then it's a win-win. So thank you honestly from the bottom of my heart. If you do like these videos and you've enjoyed them, please consider subscribing to the channel. Don't cost a penny, it's free. But it just helps our channel grow. And you know, we've got a real good community on there, full of great people. And you know, if you want to continue watching videos like this, then I'd really appreciate if you subscribe. So that's it from me today. It's windy, it's cold, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching, and take care. Cheers.
Well, I mean that there are the colours and the beauties, the designs, the beautiful way things appear. Dull people that I thought dull appear fascinating, interesting, mysterious, wonderful. But that's only the beginning. Suddenly you notice that there aren't these separations, that we're not on a separate island shouting across to somebody else and trying to hear what they're saying and misunderstanding. You know. You use the word yourself, empathy. It meets underneath the water.